So, all right. So now I'm going to read some super chats here, and we are finally going to bring David Sheridan. So I'm going to read this real quick. We have two statements from Nick Joseph. Been following you for Minute Baked. Watched Ice and thought it was cool you hung out with him. Not the biggest fan of Richard Spencer, but why is it racist to not want to be a minority in your own country? Conquest destiny. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I see a lot of these, like, not a fan of Richard Spencer. You know,
I'm not the biggest fan of Richard Spencer, but
see,
I agree with everything.
That's
he just
your
counter signals people too much.
That's your version of getting disinvited from everything, right?
Well, kind of. No, I get this on Twitter all the time. I
gotta have the disclaimer, you know.
Yeah.
So all right, so this is the question that will bring David in finally. So I'm gonna ask it, and I'll have we'll have David start this off because he's been waiting. So we have a question from the audience that says, and please super chat or give a question in the chat if you would like to. We're gonna sort of move over to ethno-nationalism type thing. So someone asked, the myth of the individual will be a roadblock to whites adopting identity. Is there any better ways to address this question? Or did you want to say something really quick about that, Richard, and then we can have David rebuttal?
No, I'll actually rebut Dave on this one. I think everyone can imagine what I would say about that, but
sure,
go ahead.
Go ahead,
Maybe
David.
not.
And introduce yourself as well.
Well, I'm a progressive YouTuber. I used to be sort of more anti-SJW, but I moved away from that crowd after a bit of drama.
I think you describe yourself as a post-SJW progressive, correct?
Half seriously.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, because it came from a meme.
I know I'm not the most biased moderator, so I'm going to try to switch into a more moderator mode here to let you guys have a discussion. But I did want to catch up with Spencer because we are friends, and that's why I brought you on, so we can sort of have a nice dialogue. And I'll give my 2 cents here and there, but I'll try to stay a little more unbiased. But go ahead. So what? Tell people how they can find you and what you think about this question here about white identity.
Okay, so I think you've already got the links into my channel and Twitter in the description at 4LTERNATE _facts on Twitter, and my YouTube channel is Alternative Facts. Yeah, I guess my position on that is that the myth of the individuals just sounds like pretentious bullshit, in my opinion, because individuals do exist. And I'm not some hardcore individualist who uses some random rhetoric like Sargon does, where I understand that there is some necessity for collectivism, but I don't think that racial identity is really the direction we're going to go forwards in.
Okay.
Would be my position on that.
What makes you believe that? It seems like if you look at every bit of social phenomenon, it seems to be hyper-racialized. Whether, we could go on and on about, life in academia at the moment, of how hyper-racialized it is. Politics is obviously hyper-racialized in terms of voting patterns. The sports are hyper-racialized, not just in terms of racial differences in athletic ability, but even in the way we view sports. So you can see this through the NFL controversy. Immigration is an issue that doesn't necessarily have to be racialized, but is totally. And whenever it's talked about, the subject of race is just around the corner or just below the surface. The refugee crisis in Europe really cannot be understood outside of race. So, I mean, it's fine to say we're not going to do that going forward. But if you just look at social phenomena, it seems to be shot through with race. It seems like there is, in fact, I could argue, no other way forward outside of racial identity.
Don't get me wrong. Like the connection, like race is going to play a part in this, and like the political idea of race is going to play a part in a lot of different conversations. But I don't think I think people are moving away from this collective racial identity as a specific thing, because I don't really think.
What makes you think that?
Because it's just I think as we're moving into a more sort of multicultural and multi-ethnic society, I just think racial identity movements are not going to have the power that they used to. When you have a majority in your country, then
I think the exact opposite is in fact the case. I would say that a racial identity movement in the United States, if we just want to focus on America, or a racial identity movement in the UK, probably would have been impossible in a mono-ethnic society. In America of 1950, there obviously was always this presence of African Americans of 10 to 12% of the population. But nevertheless, they might have had a civil rights movement, but whites understood themselves. They didn't even think about it. They just implicitly assumed that America was a dominant white majority culture. That's what the movies are going to look like. That's what the schools are going to look like, et cetera. This has now been brought into question. And it actually is a confrontation with the other that one understands oneself, collectively speaking. I mean, if I were, just some white guy living in an all-white community in Ohio or something, I might just think of myself as an individual. There's no other, we're all the same thing. I'm just a fish swimming in water, but we are now fish out of water. We're forced to confront the other. We're forced to confront people of different races. And so a lot of people talk about things like, oh, demographics are really against you or something. And my response to that is, to the contrary, demographics are on my side. As these countries are transformed through immigration or refugees or what have you, demographically, they are going to be transformed in terms of their consciousness, that people will begin to recognize the other and see the other person through this experience as part of a foreign race.
Yeah. Well, when this is the thing that that I think you're going to ignore, is that race has sort of expanded its definition. Once the idea of a race would have been the Germans and the Poles and the Slavs, and loads of different like the European race. It wouldn't have been one European white race. It would have been multiple different small races. But as we have become a more connected society as just a species, we have become more inclusive. Even the concept of whiteness is more inclusive than it was 100 or so years ago, or 200 or so years ago.
I agree with you to a large extent. I think this actually reinforces my point more than it does your point that we're going to all become individuals and race won't matter. That the word race, I agree, is inherently ambiguous. That you can find language like the Habsburg race or the German race, as you say, or other things like that, Slavs. In the sense that it's not so much vague in the sense that it can be used in different contexts and different times, but to mean roughly the same thing. It roughly means an extended family, but it can be used in different contexts. So it could mean a little ethnic group. It could mean even a family, or it can mean the white race. Now, there are many examples of the white race as a concept. There was a concept that often called Christendom that effectively encompassed all of European mankind, from Slavs to Celts and so on. There was also the development of a whiteness concept in the United States.
It was definitely in the US.
Despite the fact that the U.S. does have an Anglo-Saxon Protestant, ethnic core, in confrontation with, say, Native Americans, Indians, in confrontation with Negro slaves, and so on, and to a lesser degree in confrontation with Central Latin America. There grew this concept of the white man, and this developed even across the 19th century and 20th century. What?
That's being diluted, isn't it?
I don't think it's been diluted. I think ethnic differences are what's actually being diluted. In the United States, I mean, there used to be fairly intense rivalries between, say, Anglos and Irish, or Italians, and so on. Even Germans. I mean, Germans were persecuted actually during the First and Second World War to a degree that we sometimes forget. I think those differences have been washed away. Even in Europe,
identities can change very, very quickly.
I agree. Identities can change. I don't think anyone could disagree with that.
I think they're a lot more fluid than you're making them out to be. I don't think there's this stop-off point where we just get to this white identity and that's as far as we can go.
I actually do think that there is a major fault line around race as we use the concept today, and as we use the concept today, it is a biological concept. One can determine certain, differences. If you look at your 23andMe accounts, you can see a bit of Celtic ancestry or Slavic ancestry or something like that. But it's fundamentally European ancestry. I mean, vis-a-vis other races like African, Mongoloid, etc., it is that component which comes out. Your Celtic component doesn't really matter that much. And actually, ethnicities, genetically speaking, are really mixed up. I mean, there was, traveling around, the Vikings were cutting a swath across Europe. There was far more intermarriage in terms of ethnicity than we can imagine. I think race is actually a more coherent concept. That doesn't mean that ethnicity doesn't exist, and that doesn't mean that it won't continue to exist. There is going to be a sense of, I'm an Estonian, I'm a Slav. That's a linguistic distinction, but it is also a biological distinction. But the most fundamental distinction really is race. And even geopolitically, that distinction, that fault line is race. The refugee crisis is not really about Syrians. It is a racial component. In terms of ethnicities within Europe, this has something to do with history, but the notion that there's going to be a racial battle, between, say, French and German is unthinkable.
I know quite a few white nationalists who would probably consider Syrians white.
Well,
some of them even will say it in jest, like, "Oh, only Assad is white." But there's still disagreement over where these boundaries lie, and if it's expanding into the Middle East, how far does it go?
Well, I could address this.
This is a bit of a problem for the ethno-state, because are Syrians allowed in the ethno-state?
Yeah, I can address this. This is one of those tricky questions. In terms of the refugees coming into Europe, I mean, they certainly are not Alawite relatives of Assad. I mean, I don't think anyone would deny that there are higher Arabs in the Middle East. Persians themselves are kind of a tricky question. I mean, that they are, to some degree, Aryan. I mean, the word Iran means Aryan. I don't think anyone would deny that. I do think there is a very stark cultural divide between those two. But yeah, I mean, just because you could, I mean, the Arab, as a race is a bit of a mixture. It's not too dissimilar from mestizos in Latin America. It's very highly variegated. But none of that doesn't mean that there isn't a coherent core Europe. That when you say whiteness, you're referring to Germanics and Latins and Slavs and Anglo-Saxons, etc.
Well, there is like this. There's like a Venn diagram with a bunch of multiple different circles, shall we say, and they've all got this this large core in the middle. But it's really, when you're talking about ethno-nationalism, it's all of the parts that don't fit into every single circle that are going to be the bits that people really have arguments over. Just going, I actually did this trolling once. I went to a Red Ice video in the comments section. They were interviewing some Finnish nationalist. I just typed "Finns aren't white" into the comments section. The bloodbath was amazing.
That's true. I think that that's one of the reasons why I don't think ethnicity itself should be a dividing line. I think an intense ethno-nationalism, again, this is ethnos, much like race, can be, it's ambiguous. It can be used in different ways. An intense ethno-nationalism in the sense of Finland for the Finns, the Czech Republic for the Czechs, or whatever that is. I do think that that's actually not a way forward. I think race is a much more coherent concept. That doesn't mean that ethnicity doesn't exist. Of a contradiction,
though. I think that that's a bit of a contradiction, because the fact that people are disagreeing over what white means, but they won't disagree with there's going to be less disagreement over what a Finn is rather than what a white person is. And therefore, actually, those more exclusive definitions of ethnicity are more make more sense for your ideology than not.
I don't think they do at all. First off, in terms of are there disagreements within white nationalism? Are the Greeks white? What about the Albanians? Or I'm sorry. What am I? There are a couple of different tricky little ethnicities.
Albanians, Italians, Spanish people.
All of those people are white, obviously.
The Anglos, Irish. You could ask certain people, and they would probably find any different group of white people, and they'd say you're not white. And when there's this disagreement, like that's really important. How are you going to really, actually determine who's allowed in the ethno-state or not? Because for some people, that might be a question of life and death.
I think that you're overstating this kind of disagreement. I'm sure you can find arguments among white nationalists about these things like that. In terms of who is white, I don't think this is actually at all controversial. You know one when you see one. And in terms of, say, refugees, are you going to really get into? Do you think an African migrant into France, or let's say into the United Kingdom, where they have these different ethnic groups, is going to be like, oh, there's a Welsh person, there's an Irishman, there's an Anglo-Saxon? No, he sees a European. He sees a white man. It's very clear to him. So look, yes, of course, I'm not going to disagree with you that there aren't going to be little disputes around the edges. But for 95% of the cases, is there no controversy whatsoever about who's white? Obviously, yes.
It's a significantly smaller number than 95 because of those massive disagreements on the sides. I mean,
what are the disagreements?
Well, are Jews white?
No,
I know that
that's easy.
I know that Jared Taylor would disagree with you, probably.
I don't know what exactly Jared believes in that. I would say that Jared is probably unusual in the alt-right for thinking that Jews are white, if he does. I don't know of anyone else who would say that. I don't know any Jew who would say that. So Jared's taking a rather odd position, to be
honest. And how would you determine that Jews aren't allowed in the ethno-state? This was something I didn't really hear an adequate answer to. Like if there's tons of Jews in your country, what do you do? How do you determine whether they are? Do you have a genetic test for your entire country? Do you go into mitochondrial DNA?
It's midichlorians, actually. We'll have to test, but no. Jews don't consider themselves to be white. I mean, I think this is actually a totally non-controversial position. Jews have a very different story to tell about the history of their people. And actually, the history of their people is defined by a lack of assimilation with Gentiles. I mean, the celebration of Hanukkah is fundamentally about resisting the Greeks. It is not about being one with the Greeks in some, rebel media concept of the West. Or whatever. It's not that at all. Jews do have a fundamentally different identity. And I would say this, and this is a place where identity is actually a better concept than just purely saying race. Race is a biological concept. Race is real. Race matters. Race is the foundation of identity. I certainly believe that. But even if a Jew, through the amount of intermarriage that has taken place, is, 80% European DNA or something, he's still a Jew. He still has a concept of his people as fundamentally different. He has his own ethno-state that exists right now, the state of Israel. He has a fundamentally different path to tread.
Would you be okay with an Israel-style ethno-state where it's constantly at war? Every single one of your neighbors hates you and wants to destroy your country, and it's 20% Arab.
I obviously don't. The first part that you talked about, I obviously don't want to have any conflicts with our neighbors. The whole idea about the ethno-state is about avoiding conflict. It's about creating, and this is some place where my concept of the ethno-state might be slightly different than some others. Others might consider, say, Poland an ethno-state. It's a linguistic, religious, and ethnic community. My concept of the ethno-state is a kind of ethno-state writ large. It is a geopolitical bloc for the white race. The whole point of this is that there will be a continental-wide safe space for white people, and there's not going to be conflict. There's not going to be racial conflict or racial suspicion. In terms of international conflict, Israel is in a very, very tricky situation, just due to its creation, due to its own foreign policy, due to its own kind of mentality. But the fact is, global conflicts is never going to go away. I mean, that's one aspect of the ethno-state. It must have nuclear weapons. It must have an army and a military. It must be able to confront other geopolitical blocs, whether that is China, the Middle East, etc. Conflict will never end.
So how are you going to achieve this ethno-state then? Because you continue to talk about how it's sort of this up in the air, several decades in the future, maybe several generations in the future. But there's a bit of a problem with that, and that's the prophecy of like whites becoming a minority in pretty much every Western country that has this strong nationalist identity. So you really don't have much time. You don't have much time to achieve this ethno-state, because you've got, say, 50 years. But do you think you're going to change the culture to this hardcore pro-ethno-nationalist starting to already move into these white ethnic communities? Right,
we have all the time. Obviously we are in a crisis, but on another level, we have all the time in the world. Remember, some of my ancestors ruled most of the globe from the city of London. It's not like it's really that difficult to control large continents and populations. I mean, it's certainly possible. All it takes really is will. We must have confidence in ourselves. We must be fortified in our will to survive and flourish and so on. And if we have and if we are in control of the state, we will be able to do all of these things. And it's completely humane.
That's useless when like over 50% of your state's voting bloc is now non-white. What do you do then? Because they can just continue to vote against you, and that's going to happen. So as
democracy
far as,
is just a passing fad. On the historical scene, I mean, looking at history across the decades, I mean, democracy voting, this is just a little passing fad. I don't think it's going to last. I don't think it's a particularly
this is a perfect opportunity for me to. I want to ask a quick question here, and we're doing great so far. And I'm going to read a couple of these super chats. Someone said, "Why is it their confusion about who isn't white when whites are advocating for themselves? I never hear confusion when whites are being demonized." That's a super chat. That's kind of
okay. So so let's say like some random crazy progressive like neoliberal Silicon Valley writer or whatever talking shit about white people. Of course, they're not going to make the distinction, because they don't view race as this sort of inherent biological thing with this sort of spiritual attachment to some homeland. They're talking about it from a social construct perspective. They see it as, okay, if you're pale skinned, you're white passing, and therefore you're considered white, or something along the lines of that. And I think to an extent that isn't going to be adequate for ethno-nationalists. There seems to be a lot more. It seems to be a lot more complicated for an ethno-nationalist group to start arguing for white people, because white passing isn't good enough for a lot of white nationalists. So, for example, let's say a guy is half Egyptian. Hello, braving ruin. He did this Reddit post over a year ago, about a year and a half ago now, and he talked about he's half Egyptian. So his dad is an Egyptian immigrant, but he considers himself white. Is he allowed in the ethno-state? He's only 50% white.
Really? Is this true?
Is that a direct question or a rhetorical question?
What is a direct question? He's as white as Obama. But he wants to be in the ethno-state. He wants to be in the ethno-state.
That's an interesting person. I actually have been asked this question before. I think it was actually asked by a half Asian person, Graham Wood. I think a roaming millennial might have asked me a similar question. Look, so long as the vast majority of the population is core European and that the state is geared towards our future, if there are on the edges are someone who's half Asian or half Egyptian, and they genuinely want to be part of this community, they understand themselves as part of a European story, this just is not a big deal, to be honest. I think you guys are inflating some of these like kind of minor questions or claiming that there's all, they're all this anti-Irish animus and and white supremacists or white nationalists or whatever. I mean, look, you're kind of inflating these small disputes into things that are deal breakers. They're not. Let me add one thing also real quick to that super chat comment about when whites are being demonized, no one questions like, are they white enough? Oh, we want to demonize these people, an entire race, but are all of them white enough? We're not sure. No, they never say that. But also, no one ever questions whether anyone involved with Black Lives Matter is black enough or something like that. And actually, maybe they should. There are actually many cases of a kind of mulatto-tocracy on top of the black civil rights infrastructure and black nationalism, but the kind of Ben jealous type of the NAACP. These people seem to be 75% white, to be honest. And these are the high IQ elite, the talented 10th of the civil rights infrastructure. No one questions whether they're black enough, and maybe they should. But again, it's all of these questions about whether the white race really exists, or some of these marginal groups, someone living in Turkey who's of Austrian heritage, is he white? All of these just seem to be exceptional marginal cases, and to focus in on them as deal breakers is just an act of deflection.
Well, it's not a deal breaker, because this probably, even if it's say like 1% of the American population that actually fits this sort of very unsure boundary, right? That's still 30 million people. And that's 30 million people who aren't sure if they're going to be taken out of their homes, if they're going to be moved away, if they're going to have to find somewhere else to live in 50 years, if they might even be shot, because ethno-nationalism has a history of violence. There isn't an example of some peaceful creation of an ethno-state. And I know you've brought up the Paris Peace Agreement of 1919, but you do realize, like, after that there was a 20-year period of constant war throughout Europe.
Look,
a month after.
Look, first off, look, history's violent, and the other thing, in terms of just engaging in extreme, genocides and classicides, I mean, the left takes the cake. I mean, there really is no competitor. And I would include Hitler as ultimately no competitor to communist violence. So if you want to just weigh a death toll across the last 100 years, the left, Marxism, they've won.
Okay,
no one can compete.
Fine, let's not be Marxists too, but that doesn't change the fact that there's still a serious death toll when it comes to ethno-nationalism. You said multiple times that there's this precedent of a peaceful ethnic redistribution, but you use examples like Yugoslavia, and 10,000 people died, and 20,000
I've never
weren't
used
accounted
that
for.
as a good
You
example.
have. You
I
have
said
used
in
Yugoslavia
1919 Yugoslavia was created. I certainly wouldn't call the 1990s. I don't look to the 1990s breakup of Yugoslavia as, oh, that was wonderful. Obviously, that was terrible.
All right,
that was a multi-ethnic kingdom.
Let's take a quick pause, hold that thought, and I'm going to read off these super chats. And if you want to keep talking about the same thing, or if there's a question in here that sparks your interest, just go ahead.
Sure.
So one person said, a nation is a people founded on an ethos or ethnos. An ethno-state is conforming the state and nation it represents to the interests of the nation. Someone else, Garm93, said, Richard, where can I find your talks with Bowden in their entirety? Also, Edgy is part Coptic Egyptian, get fucked Spino.
We was kangs.
Yeah, real quick, let me finish. Sam Jenkins said, how will racial nationalism improve quality of life when racialism is inherently imperialist? Zachary said, please have Mike Enoch from TRS on. And the last comment says, you can't compare a half Egyptian to a mulatto. Egyptians are Caucasian. I knew a half Egyptian with blonde hair and gray eyes. And I don't want to go forever about, who's white conversation, because I feel like that's been argued so many times. But you guys can go ahead and pick up where you find interesting.
What was the question before that? That one of those sparked my interest. Oh, about how will an ethno-state improve the quality of life because it's inherently
racialism is inherently imperialist.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I mean, ethno-nationalism, again, we need to define terms here. Ethno-nationalism is not inherently imperialist. It's actually anti-imperialist, if anything. The history of ethno-nationalism in the sense of an ethnicity that will often want to break away from something larger, whether that's a secession movement or any of these kinds of things. The breakup, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, all this kind of stuff. Ethno-nationalism is anti-imperialist. I actually would agree that my conception of the ethno-state, the writ large conception, is imperialist, actually. It is in the sense that it is a larger block. It is a geopolitical block. Now, there would be federalism within that. There could be different regions with autonomy and so on. But the ethno-state is a foreign policy. It's a geopolitical conception just as much as it is a racial conception. We have to have a secure territory for the white race and one that has the ability, that has the military ability, that possesses nuclear weapons, that can confront other blocks around the world, so that we aren't going to be overrun by the Chinese. We're not going to be overrun by an Islamic invasion or so on. So, it is for us, but it's also about confronting the rest of the world.
Yeah, but this is all great.
But of course, in terms of the betterment of life, I mean, look, people vote with their feet. I mean, white people want to live in white places, and they are just infinitely more happy when they're living in a place like Kalispell, Montana. Or where are you right now, Baked, in Alaska?
I'm in Alaska.
Are you in Juneau?
Yeah. Anchorage, Alaska.
Anchorage, Alaska. Many of these places where they can know their neighbors. I mean, in one of the towns where in Whitefish, a place that I'll spend a lot of time. Look, there's an ethos of not only leaving your car unlocked, but very often leaving your car running with the keys in the ignition and the doors unlocked if you want to go run a quick errand. Kids can leave their bicycles without a chain by the side of the road or in town, and have a general feeling of community where people will respect one another. People feel like they're in the same boat as everyone else who lives there, that we have a common history and we're all in this together. The sense of community is so much greater when there is no question of race. And so in terms of an ethno-state, white people are going to be so happy.
But then we're living in a time where crime rates are down, crime rates are down further than ever. in both the US and the UK, crime rates are lower than ever. We can talk about, oh well, white people will be less afraid of putting of leaving their doors unlocked, but it doesn't change the fact that we're actually in one of the safest times in human history, and this isn't.
I think
this
that's
hasn't
an
been
illusion.
changed by.
Well, and real quick, a bunch of people in the chat are bringing up, what about the violence of multiculturalism? Look at the tribal crime we are seeing in Europe currently, and the diverse enrichment has just started. And also, people are bringing up, what is the death toll of democracy?
Oh, absolutely. All of those things are absolutely true. I mean, the ethno-state is, to one degree, a way of avoiding violence. It's a way of avoiding racial breakdown. It's a way of avoiding the race war.
Well, how do you do that without achieving a race war? You can continue to come up with this ways. You can come up with this utopian idea all you like, but you don't actually have a consistent plan. You don't have a real plan on how to do this. You just have this idea, oh, someone else will figure it out. That's not good enough.
I've never said someone else will figure it out. What I've always said is that history will show us the way. There are going to be contingencies to the historical experience that we cannot predict. I think it would be bizarre and ridiculous for me to sit down and say, well, tomorrow morning, in order to implement the ethno-state, we're going to do this, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do that. History doesn't work like that. History will offer opportunities for dramatic, paradigmatic change. But we have to wait for that opportunity.
So you're just
But that's
saying
not a punt. I'm just being reasonable.
That the solution will just reveal itself magically. That's not a good answer, Richard.
We'll have to will it into existence. But we can't. It's not just a question of will or consciousness. There is going to be a historical opportunity. This is what I get all the time. Yeah, I even got it from like Nick Fuentes types of like, you can't tell me how we're going to implement this tomorrow morning. No, I simply can't. Because like no one... Lenin could not tell you when they could implement communism. I mean, they took an opportunity, and through the just the contingencies and absurdities of history, an opportunity was presented to them. But they had a conception.
Well, Richard. That didn't go very well.
Well,
that was one of the most authoritarian regimes in human history.
I'm just simply using that as an historical example of there are
moments
moments of paradigmatic change.
Yeah,
I mean, the American Revolution. I could say the exact same thing I just said about the Bolshevik Revolution as I could say about the American Revolution. That was a miraculous thing. George Washington fought on behalf of the British Empire in Canada against the French, and within a quarter century, he was at war with the British Empire. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And the fact is, history will present these opportunities for paradigmatic change. No question. We just have to have that will and that consciousness beforehand for that change to be enacted.
Again, this is a great motivational speech, but it's not actual plans. It's not actual policy. These aren't achievable goals. These are just the vague platitudes, Richard.
Because we are not there yet. I mean, we have to think, look, the ethno-state is grounded in reality. It's grounded in the reality of race. It's grounded in human nature. But the ethno-state, as I understand it, has a utopian, you could say a far-off, wide-eyed quality to it. I think that's good. Because the fact is, we always have to offer people a future. There has to be a way out. But now, the problem with the left and leftist utopias is they're not grounded in reality. They're grounded in incorrect economic theories. They're grounded in the willful ignorance of human nature. The ethno-state is grounded in the reality of human nature, the reality of race. But there is a futuristic-like quality to it. I don't deny that. I think that's actually necessary. Conservatives never had this forward push, this dream aspect to them. Conservatives are always reacting. So they're like, oh, we don't like gay marriage. We don't like the civil rights movement. We don't like mass immigration. We don't like this. We don't like that. But they've never offered a real solution. They've simply say it was better 20 years ago, or, oh, I don't like this. Let's try to get rid of it. They've never offered a true vision for the future. That's where the alt-right, myself, identitarians, that's where we're fundamentally different.
Yeah, and this is actually why I think you're as compelling a speaker as you are. It's because humans do have this tendency to want an answer to a question. They want a solution, but that doesn't necessarily make it the right solution just because they've got one. People want an answer, but it doesn't mean that it's actually an achievable one. This is why people are moving to sort of the radical ends of the political spectrum at the moment, is because we're in a situation where things are becoming polarized due to loads and loads of outside factors. But it's not, I don't really see how this sort of crazy out there idea of an ethno-state, you've even said, you've just admitted that you don't have any real policies, you don't actually have any real solutions. And this is all vague sort of motivational stuff to create in the history. And meanwhile, the white people are becoming a minority. So what are you going to do in the meantime? You don't have any short-term goals.
Oh, I have short-term goals. Of course I do. But this is what I'm saying. Conservatives have short-term goals. All conservatives have are short-term goals. The difference with the alt-right and identitarianism is that we actually have long-term goals. Now, short-term goals, there are plenty of things that could be enacted right now that would benefit the lives of white people and would actually benefit the lives of many African Americans and Hispanics as well. I think serious immigration reform right now, a moratorium on immigration, would greatly benefit this country on the short term. It actually probably wouldn't affect things on the long term, in the sense that the majority of births are actually to non-white. Non-white babies are the majority of births in this country. And so, you know, we are going to become a minority white country, you know, whether we like it or not, whether immigration is halted or not. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't benefit us in the next 10 years.
So how do you create your ethno-state if it's not via the state? If it's not via the current democratic system that exists as it is now, and you're hoping for some giant paradigm shift, are you just going to sort of sit and wait for it to happen?
We do have to actually be patient. I'm very down to earth about this. The fact is, history does change, and sometimes paradigmatic changes come like a thief in the night. There are plenty of examples of people who have formed a kind of deep state that have affected change. There are plenty of examples of the democratic process leading towards crazy results. I mean, Donald Trump is just a small example in this regard. There are examples of crises and so on. I mean, in terms of things changing, I think that in a way you have to tell me how this current paradigm is A, wonderful and leads to happiness, and B, is gonna last forever. Because I don't see it. I see the us at the end of a political paradigm, and not at the beginning of one, and not at its full flourishing.
I don't think the current neoliberal sort of hegemony is going to last much longer. But I don't think that we're going to get into it. Yeah, but I don't think that that anything is going to happen with ethno-nationalism. And I think that And I understand that maybe you are willing to wait 50 years for this paradigmatic shift to come, or maybe you're willing to wait your entire lifetime, and your kids will see the paradigmatic shift, or maybe your grandkids will. But not everyone within your movement is willing to do that. Not everyone in your movement has this very optimistic outlook. A lot of them are heavily black-pilled, especially the sort of Daily Stormer types and the more radical like very dark corners of the internet types. And those are the kinds of young men who are itching to create change. They want to do something. And a lot of them are not going to sit and wait. So what are they going to do?
It's incumbent upon me to channel their energies towards a positive direction for a white future. Look, I don't want another Dylan Roof as much as you don't want another Dylan Roof. Dylan Roof is a very, I'll say this, I actually have a lot of sympathy for Dylan Roof. I think Dylan Roof had a very sad life. He did not have a father figure. He did not see a way forward. He did feel, apparently, from reading his manifesto, some racial nationalism, but he obviously expressed this or articulated this in the worst conceivable manner. to the degree that he delegitimized his very cause. I don't want to see another Dylan Roof just as much as everyone else does. It's incumbent upon leaders in the alt-right and identitarianism to give people positive visions and positive outlooks, to be radical, no question. I don't want to water anyone down, but not to descend into nihilism.
Yeah, but with the rise of the alt-right, there have been more. There have been more of these sort of mild terror attacks. There have been copycats of Dylan Roof. There have been people who have gone out and stabbed black men with swords just out in the street to start the race war, because these guys believe that the white race is running out of time.
Didn't
very
Sam
unfortunate
like that? Wasn't he one of the school shooters?
Who was that?
Samuel Hyde.
Oh my god.
sorry.
That was really tasteful.
I'm sorry. I had to kill the mood.
Look.
Let me read. We have so many messages coming in. Let me read a couple of these.
Okay.
Hold that thought. Take a little 1-minute breather.
Yeah.
Okay. And see if anything pops out at you. So, someone said the white ethnostate can have a panel of black guys on retainer who settle gray area cases. They will tell us who is and who isn't a cracker.
That is actually a really good idea.
That's
a cracker.
Great suggestion. I mean, they're wow. Okay, so then next one says Hitler claimed his brand of racialism would create an era of peace that would be so natural as to resist any change. History proved him wrong. Next, race war is inevitable. In fact, it's already happening. The only difference between now and later is the government being able to maintain order, as bad as that order is. And then we have 2 questions for David. David, so we need immediate solutions for every problem regressives created with their multicultural madness, or else we become third world nations. And one more for David. If David and his ilk don't think ethno-nationalism is going anywhere, why are they so fucking worried about the alt-right?
Okay, so I think I'll answer that first question, that last question first, because okay. I think it's the more important one, and the reason why I think it's the reason why I'm basically doing this and why I'm here.
Sure.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I don't really think the alt-right is going to achieve anything. If ethno-nationalism or fascism or whatever you want to call it is going to rise again, it's not going to be via the alt-right. It's going to be by whoever succeeds the alt-right, as far as I'm concerned. Whoever succeeds the Richard Spencers and the Millennial Woes and the Jared Taylors of the world. And as far as I'm concerned, at the moment, the alt-right is... I think is causing some significant harm to the political the sort of political discourse, and I think it's in a lot of cases it's turning young men into very dangerous people, and like I've said already, it's creating terrorists, as far as I am concerned, and it's not just that the alt-right is it's not just like the people like Richard Spencer. I don't think you, Richard, are necessarily grooming people to violence, but people around you are. Like, for example, Millennial Woes has stated before that violence is on the way, and that we're not going to, and that if you believe in peace, in ethno-nationalism, but you only want to achieve it peacefully, then you are not an ethno-nationalist. He has said this publicly. He's taken the video down now, but that is one of his public statements that he said to thousands of people. And he's not the only one. Now, when someone hears this, when a group hears this, that is going to be some seriously that's going to be some seriously scary stuff. When people are thinking that they are an army of migrants is coming to rape them, that the race war is going to happen, like the other super chat said, like the race war is already happening. That guy already thinks there's a war happening. Do you think he's? How long do you reckon it's going to take for him to take up arms against whoever he thinks the war is against? This is terrifying. This is really.
Someone sent a super chat, by the way, just now. They said, "I have my sword. BRB starting race war." Go ahead. I'm just reading.
Yeah. And like, as far as I'm concerned, like, Richard, you might want a peaceful transition of ethno-nationalism, but what guarantee do you have that your side, that your group of ethno-nationalists who are all okay with peace, how do you guarantee that your peaceful side is the one that's actually going to achieve the ethno-state, rather than the people who want to achieve it violently, who want to achieve it quicker?
Well, let me address
can I
this.
just...
Oh, we have a visitor.
Richard, before you do that, okay. Can I just defend?
Sure, because you were called out by name there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, right. This was like a year and a half ago now, and that video, I did take it down initially because I thought, oh, people are misinterpreting it, but it's back up now. It's called Peaceful Ethno-Nationalism. And I was certainly not advocating violence. What I was saying was about two different things. First, violence is on the way in Europe. That is simply a fact. I think it's a fact. I think that civil war is coming. Civil unrest is coming, which I think will devolve into civil war. And then the other thing I was saying was that I think that the resolution to that will be sure, but I don't think it's going to be individuals taking it upon themselves to do vigilante action and, whatever, harm individuals. I think it will be largely state violence, actually, in order to regain control of the situation. So when I said, I can't remember the exact words I used, it was something like, if you only want to achieve ethno-nationalism peacefully, then you're not going to get what you want. That's what I meant. I mean, of course,
you did
I
say
think we can incentivize. Sorry?
You did say that what I said on stream was a direct quote from your video.
I don't know what stream you're talking about, but the video's there.
Oh, this stream here, the one I just said earlier. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But really, I think.
All right. Well, I want to clarify. I am not an advocate of violence.
Look, I think Millennial Woes speaks with my voice on this, and it's a very complicated matter. First off, I agree that violence is coming, and that the ongoing immigration crisis and refugee crisis, invasion crisis, whatever you want to call it, is creating violence. But then I would also say this: I recognize the violence within history making itself. I understand that politics is an inherently violent way of being. One can't think politically, can't seriously think about politics if one only talks about, public schooling and health insurance or something. Politics is fundamentally about who controls a monopoly of violence on a territory, who is sovereign, is he who can confront other states in a potentially violent manner using a military. So I am not a Pollyanna when I think about what the world is going to be. Also, I am willing to use the state on behalf of my people's flourishing and future. There is no question about that whatsoever. Every other group is willing to say this. I mean, Islam, do you think they'll have any compunction to use the state in order to promote Islam? Of course not. So the fact is, we have to recognize that fact. And as Machiavelli understood, we might have to be a little bit evil in order to prevent a greater evil. And that's the tragedy of existence. That's the tragedy of politics itself. But I recognize these things. Vigilante violence, the Dylan Roof types, the so on. This is just massively demoralizing and massively counterproductive. It's not just immoral. It's not just a crime. It's a mistake.
Yeah. Well, real quick here, I'm going to let Woes respond. I'm going to read a couple of these comments. Someone said, Woes jumping in like The Shining came in with an axe through the wall. He definitely had a great...
Well, I just thought it would be better if I defended myself rather than other people have to second guess my words. So that's why I came in.
Yeah,
but I won't stay because this is really between...
Sorry, David. Yeah, we're not trying to
that's fair enough.
Team up on you, but you did name his name. Is it okay if Woes maybe sticks around, David? Is that fine?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool. Let me read two more of these. Someone said, by arguing that the ethno-state is not happening fast enough, David implicitly has accepted it's the right thing to do if it could only happen faster. That's a good point.
No, I'm accepting for the sake of argument. If it were a good thing, then you're running out of time to do it. So what is your solution for that? I'm sort of arguing from your perspective. I'm sort of taking a like for the sake of argument perspective.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll let you expand on that. And then last comment here, someone said, if you take away the means of protest from people, the only thing left is violence. JFK said that. He didn't endorse violence, and neither did Woes.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
So,
thank you, JFK.
Yeah, thank you,
I would agree with that.
Okay, cool. Well, David, you want to pick up from there?
Yeah. Well, the problem is these apocalyptic narratives where you sort of say violence is inevitable, so we need to maybe get ready for civil war to be prepared for to prevent more violence if we just arm ourselves and protect ourselves from the Muslim invaders. That's often the kind of thing that ends up starting the violence in the first place. Apocalyptic narratives.
Well, the violence has already started, David. But David, the violence has already started, and it wasn't us who started it. Muslims are already doing this. They're torching their own ghettos in Sweden, and I believe in Paris and Germany as well. They're raping white women. I mean, I think that's violence. And I also think it's the start of a civil war.
Okay, migrant crime is. I'm not going to say like migrant crime isn't a problem, but migrant crime is not an act of war. This is not some kind of state coming to you.
It kind of is, actually. And I think you need to understand it. I mean, do you think that the 9/11 terror event was the equivalent of a car accident or a gas main explosion?
No, but that was a specific.
It was a political event.
Yeah, that was organized by Al Qaeda.
So was the equally political are the rapes of German women on New Year's in Cologne, literally in the shadow of that amazing medieval Christian cathedral. These aren't just random acts of violence, and they certainly aren't accidents or so on. They are actually deeply identitarian and political. Those rapes weren't just, I agree kind of with feminists in a weird way, they weren't just about sex. And they weren't just about drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff. It was political in the sense that it was an act of conquest. And after every war involves men crossing borders, entering the capital cities of foreign nations, and they end, sadly, I have to say, in the rape of women as a final symbolic, demoralizing act of conquest. And that is exactly what we saw in the immigrant invasion experience of 2015 and 2016. It ended with rape, just as the Second World War ended with rape, just as every other war has ended in rape.
Okay, so because some migrants are rapists, that means this is an act of
David,
war.
let me briefly say this. I think that it would be a big mistake to see all of this in isolation, the sort of standard progressive thing, which is just, well, it's just another isolated case. It's just another lone wolf. When obviously there is a pattern emerging, and as the pattern emerges, as the skeleton emerges, the flesh and the meat will also emerge to accommodate it. I think that, in other words, as their morale will strengthen, their momentum will increase. I mean, this is just human nature, and it's group dynamics. This is what I think. It's very naive to say, well, it's just a few.
I'm not saying it's
just a few 10 years ago. Now it's more, and it's going to be more and more and more. When I say it's inevitability.
Yeah, and the best thing we can do is deal with the criminals, deal with the actual criminals, and integrate the actual upstanding citizens. You do realize this is still a minority of the actual migrants coming in who are committing these crimes and actually committing all of these horrible acts.
Two examples. The guy who did the plan attack, he hid in a Muslim ghetto in Brussels. I've forgotten the name of it now.
Molenbeek.
That's it, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And apparently the whole community knew that it was him.
Yeah, they hit him.
Well, yeah, but you've got to count everyone in that community along with. You've got to count everyone in that community as an accessory to terrorism, since they knew who he was, common knowledge.
This is the worst case scenario. This is the most extreme example you can give. Like,
that's the first one that came to mind. I'm sure there are many others.
We should only give you mediocre, unconvincing examples to bolster our case.
No, of course not. No, of course not. But I'm saying this is the most extreme case. This is not something that's common. And Molenbeek is a case
we don't know
of
how common it is.
failure. And this is a failure to actually properly integrate. And to an extent, it is a problem with sort of like neoliberal racial identity politics and all of that stuff. There is an issue with being a bit soft on Islam, shall we say, and being a bit soft on criticizing.
Yeah, but it's also an issue of them.
Oh yeah,
but it's also an issue of them themselves, because
it is.
They are adhering to ancestral identity because it means safety and security and familiarity. So of course they're going to do that. Then the other example I was going to give you was Rotherham, where it was common knowledge what was going on, and yet it went on and on. There were a few whistleblowers within the Muslim community, but just like a tiny number, nowhere near enough to actually stop it from going on. So again, I would say if that's going on now, and the numbers of them are increasing all the time throughout Europe, how are you going to integrate them? How are you going to stop them from doing this?
Well, we got to find. I don't think the idea is to start movements saying "get out, to all of the actual decent migrants. What we need to do is we need to understand that there are whistleblowers within these communities, and there are people who do want to speak out against this, and we've got to make sure that these movements don't try and hide in these enclaves. The worst case scenario is when the peoples start living
so optimistic,
separating.
I sort of like the get out idea. I think that sounds like a pretty decent plan there. But real quick,
it's a decent plan. But how are you going to achieve it?
Oh no, I'm joking.
You don't have the policies.
I'm gonna read a couple super chats we have here. And the first one said David has done miles better than Sargon. Props.
Let me second that. Actually, in David's defense, he's actually addressed what I'm saying. He has not just purposefully derailed the conversation or gone into absurdities. So this has actually been a conversation. Well, Sargon, that could get very frustrating, to be honest.
As far as I'm concerned, Sargon and I effectively fell out because we disagreed on how to deal with the alt-right.
Interesting.
So,
and we're getting a ping here. Apparently, Braving Ruin would like to come on and defend himself. Is that okay, David?
Oh dear. I'd rather not. I'd rather not, because we have some actual specific personal drama. But if you want to bring him on after I'm gone or whatever, that's fine.
Well, could we
I'll leave, and then it could be less.
Do you want?
I'll leave. Okay.
I'd rather not be on a stream with him.
Okay. Let's respect David's wishes. All right, we won't bring him on. Maybe that's a stream for another day. Sorry, Braving Ruin. But we got to respect David's wishes. All right, so let me read the rest of these. Let's see. They said, Richard, how immediate an issue time-wise is white genocide, if that's a term you use? Someone said David also advocates violence. He's on record for advocating the removal of most refugees in Germany. Someone said, I'm loving woes showing up behind Spencer to give the BTFO to the cucks and lefties. Someone said Mossad did 9/11.
I just wanted to defend myself so that Spencer wouldn't have to do it for me. That's the only reason.
No, it was I was just about to tell David that you were coming on, and then you just appeared before I could say anything. So it was brilliant, like a clip out of The Shining for sure. Someone said Mossad did 9/11, not sand people. All right, thank you. And then the last one here says Spino wants to live in a pacifistic bubble wrap world. I assume that this will resemble his anemic childhood.
Pacifistic bubble wrap world. I'm being constantly told that I'm the one advocating for the one filled with evil Muslim migrants trying to kill me. But I'm also advocating a pacifistic bubble wrap world. Can you guys at least stay consistent, please?
Well, you think they're easy solutions to this question. Millennial Woes and I
don't think there are easy solutions to this question. Don't get me wrong.
Okay,
I know that this
technical solutions to this question.
Moving forwards is going to be difficult and it's going to be complicated. And I just don't think that your solutions are even like articulated enough to be solutions, to even be potential solutions.
Well, okay. Let me say it from my perspective, what we are doing at this stage, because people say to me that I should, stand for election and things like that. First of all, I don't think I would be a good politician. So, and I think it's ridiculous to say that anyone else in the alt-right should stand, for the same reason. If they're not going to be good at it, then, it's pointless. But also, more broadly, people say you should have policies and all that. I don't see it that way. I think that what we're doing is we're trying to create a cultural change so that people will start more political people will start thinking in those terms. People who are more practical than us, frankly, or certainly more practical than me, will start thinking in those terms about how to implement political solutions. At this stage, I mean, I don't even think it's really political. I see it as cultural and spiritual. I think we need to reawaken something that has died in white people, or at least gone dormant in white people. That's what I see our job as doing, and that's what I fundamentally see the alt-right as.
Sure. Yeah, I had a question for we had a question for David real quick from the comments, and I think it ties in with what Woes was sort of saying. So for David, someone said in Alabama, with the recent Roy Moore vote, 88% of non-whites voted for the Democrat. Doesn't it make sense for white people to advocate for their own interests based on the racial demographics?
Yes.
Well, Roy Moore said that blacks were better under slavery. I can understand why black people wouldn't be okay with voting for him and might vote against this guy. On top of all of the other scandals around.
88% is not different than the manner in which African Americans vote nationally. That's par for the course.
Yeah, I think that's similar to
this is why I'm suggesting that. Really, whites advocating for their own interests in this sort of ethnic homogeneity isn't going to happen anymore. It's just not going to move forwards because white people are becoming a minority. This white identity stuff is either going to have to start diluting, and you're going to have to start including more people in the definition of whites, or you're not going to have the voting bloc power that you used to, and you're not going to have the power in democracy that you used to. You're not going to achieve it through the democratic system. So how are you going to actually achieve your goals? You can maybe, I don't know, you can go the old segregationist route with I don't know, Craig Cobb. That was a disaster. There's a reason that no white nationalists cite him today, because it was he got arrested for running around with assault rifles. So there isn't really a solution to this. There isn't an achievable way to get this white ethno-state in the first place, let alone if it was good.
I agree that things become more difficult through the democratic process as the demography changes. I mean, there's that demos in both of those words, and demographics and democracy. No question. That being said, I wouldn't associate our movement or our ideals with the Republican Party, with Republican victories. I mean, sometimes people are like, oh, can you believe it? In 2024, Texas will go blue and so on. And it's like, oh, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe we need to rid ourselves of this Republican Party and all these halfway measures. So I agree that it is going to become more difficult. That there is going to be dramatic changes, at the very least aesthetic changes in what politics is like. And I think we're seeing that right now. I think we're seeing this even in this kind of Me Tooism, this delegitimization of white men. Last night at the Golden Globes, I mean, it was directed towards people like Harvey Weinstein, of course, but one would be wrong not to recognize that there's a much broader delegitimization of white people going on. But the fact is, history does not always change with elections. I mean, and also one could question the degree to which we're really allowed to vote on these things, in general. through a representative democratic system, effectively Congress makes these laws. Yes, they are elected, but the ultimate and actual impact of these laws is never really put up for a vote. The 1965 Immigration Act was presented as just this is just an extension of the civil rights movement. It's a cosmetic change. It would never lead to a demographic change. I mean, Ted Kennedy himself expressed that. Of course, lo and behold, 50 years later, it is profoundly transformed the demographics of the United States. At no point are referenda put forward where the population is really allowed to vote on these things. We already live in this extremely mediated system where the most important things aren't ever put up to a vote. So, I mean, look, history doesn't change through elections. Elections are just kind of, particularly as they are now, they're kind of reality shows. I mean, they're entertaining as such.
Well, even then, okay, maybe not elections then. I like that. Like elections are a microcosm of the wider issue that white people are becoming a smaller force, a smaller representative force of each country. That they're no longer the might makes right group that has complete dominance over each of these formerly quote unquote white countries. So how do they advocate for their own interests? Why don't we instead
people who are in charge now are a tiny minority? The people who make profound decisions with regard to war, America's Afghanistan policy, for an example, when it comes to taxation, when it comes to finances, when it comes to the economics, we're talking about a tiny minority of the population. I mean, I would say that, democracy is overrated when it comes to actually affecting history, actually affecting policy, affecting geopolitics and foreign policy. One could argue that it barely has as much of effect at all. Politicians who promise one thing do almost the exact opposite. FDR promised his constituents he would not get into a European war. Boom, he did. George W. Bush did much the same. We're going to have a humble foreign policy that was in vogue in the late 90s vis-a-vis Bill Clinton. Boom, he became the most insane neoconservative advocate we've ever seen. I mean, I think in terms of all this stuff of demographics and voting, I mean, I agree. I don't want to see the loss of a Democratic majority. I will shed a certain tear when Texas goes blue in 4 or 8 years or something like that. But in terms of our ultimate mission and in terms of truly changing the course of elections are overrated, my friend. They just don't matter.
Okay, so this is starting to get very cynical about the politics in general. Really, at this point, your advocacy is at the point where you're almost admitting that your group doesn't really have much of a control over the general populace doesn't have much of a control over the actual way that
the general populace has a will to normalcy and a will to conformity. The general populace will accept the status quo, and they want legitimate. They want it to be legitimate. They don't want to be thought of as radicals and changing the system. The vast majority of human beings, and this is a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. The vast majority of human beings want to get along. They want to see themselves as part of a community that's right and just and normal. It's not rock. They don't want to rock the boat and so on. The populations will accept regimes. I mean, the Russian population eventually accepted communism. It became normal after there was these spasmodic flames of revolution and civil war. That regime ultimately gained a certain common quality, a legitimacy for the common middle person. So will every regime can achieve this. I just don't think like the average opinion, the average American, the average person, they don't really affect history. I mean, the question is, can we capture the imagination of those elite, those activist elite who really do affect history? Can we become those people ourselves? That's really the issue. And the normal people will go along with it. I mean, the average person has accepted multiracialism to a large degree. He's accepted this sexual transformation of common mores. I don't think any normal human being wanted any of this stuff, and polling reveals that, and just objective behavior reveals this. But they've accepted it. I mean, this is just in the sense of like, can you win over, you know, the average Joe in Peoria to embrace the ethno-state? It's just not that's not really at issue, because that's not how history works.
So real quick, and by the way, I think this is a great discussion. I want to make it very clear. I think I speak for everyone here that we're super appreciative of David being here, and he has been much more pleasant than Sargon. And it does take a lot of bravery to come up against someone like Richard Spencer. I surely don't want to be debating Richard that often. I like to be on the same side as him because he is a very good speaker and a good debater. So I got to say, David, I do really admire your courage for coming on and sort of even being teamed up on in a way.
I think there is some random white nationalist on Twitter who owes me 100 quid now.
Totally, but no, I mean, you're definitely David. If you haven't seen David's face, he's definitely a big meme in the alt-right, even though he doesn't like it. I've seen.
No, I love it. I love it.
I've seen his face everywhere. It's pretty great. But I'm gonna give a quick question. It was a super chat, a question to Spencer, and then David, you and Woz, you can respond. Someone said Dworkin argues the racial power relations are an externalization of male-female power dynamics. What are your thoughts on that?
Spencer, do you want to go first?
So she is saying that racism is just an expression of misogyny. Is that what she's arguing or something?
I guess it would be.
I don't know who Dworkin is exactly.
Andrea Dworkin is a radical feminist second waver.
Okay, yeah. So I guess they
are
just
basically making everything about feminism. I mean, it's just I'm not.
Yeah, they're saying that the racial tensions and the racial power relations are basically an externalization of male-female power dynamics.
Well, I would say this, and I'm probably reading too much into her. I'm giving her too much credit, but I would say this, that a great deal of the racial tension is about the woman question. At some fundamental level. You know, it is.
Oh yeah, let's talk about the women question. I think we need to talk about that. We've talked about
women are the most important resource. I mean, they are the key to the future. They're therefore the key to civilization. So in some fundamental way, racial nationalism is about maintaining this indispensable resource, no question. And I think also women, you'll often see them go with the strong horse. I mean, one of the crucial insights of F. Roger Devlin, or you say the manosphere or whatever, is men. Our fantasy is variety. You know, our fantasy is being Don Juan or James Bond, and roaming the world or the countryside and having a woman here, a woman there, one in Italy, one in Spain, kind of thing. That's our kind of internal fantasy that we don't live out, obviously. But the female fantasy is a little bit different. Female sexuality is different. It is hypergamy in the sense of it's marrying up. It isn't so much about having multiple partners. That's porn. It's more about going with the best partner and improving her lot through marriage and through her sexual attraction. And yes, you can see a lot of a racial change in the sense of women seeing that they'll have a better life for themselves with this new big man, this new non-white person who is more powerful or more legitimate or maybe even more savage, more alpha. So I think the racial and the sex or woman question certainly intersect, no question. I wouldn't reduce one to the other. but they're certainly related and intertwined.
David?
I guess it's a very complicated, and we could have hours and hours and hours of discussion on the sort of how race and gender intertwine, and how they interact in different ways and stuff like that. And I guess really, I guess I would probably say that it's interesting how white nationalists have had. The alt-right has had a bit of a difficult time, really, recently with the woman question.
Oh, with the trad thoughts? Is that what you're
with the trad thought civil war, as I was calling it. I know you, Woes, you had a bit of a spat with Nick Fuentes, didn't you, over this? And I know Andrew Anglin has not been very happy with the recent like defense of female members of the alt-right.
Yeah, there's a disagreement there. One thing well, it's just a disagreement of tactics. One thing that I think is quite clear is that women are not, and this gets what I was going to say about that Dworkin quote. She's correct, I think, in the sense that men care about their groups fundamentally. Like I am in this group, they are in that group, and I have to look after my group, and so on. Whereas I think women are more fickle and unpredictable in this sense. They will ally with what looks like the strongest group. I think there is more loyalty than we sometimes give them credit for, going by various pieces of evidence, but I won't go into that just now. I think they do have more racial loyalty than is often said. However, clearly, I think male racial loyalty, I mean, men will sleep around with, Hapas and all that, but ultimately they do identify very strongly with their race. So I think that the Dworkin quote is correct in the sense that, yes, warfare between groups is fundamentally warfare between groups of men who are, competing for resources and so on. And as an extension of that, yes, it is difficult to get women into something like the alt-right because it's fundamentally about competing over resources and groups of men doing that. And I think that a lot of women don't see especially in an age like ours, which is so decadent, it's difficult to make women see the value of it. And that's why one of the many reasons that I think it's good for us to have women in the movement who will attract other women into it. This is just an interpersonal thing, really.
Yeah, didn't you say,
human
David,
resources?
We were talking before the show, didn't you say you were a MGTOW or a former MGTOW?
That was a long time ago. I was never one of the hardcore never sleep with women MGTOWs. I was don't get married, don't have kids, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And I think really it was basically when the MGTOWs started purity spiraling in a similar way to how I see the sort of more radical Anglin-esque types of the alt-right. They seem to have a similar attitude towards women, and it's actually quite amusing to watch them almost self-destruct their own movement in a way to sort of hold to their views on women should shut up and stay in the kitchen.
I think that ruin our own movement. I think that's a bit overrated. I've seen a lot of these purity spirals come and go over my career. I think it's best just to kind of keep one's eyes open. I mean, I think in some ways the critics of females in the movement certainly had important points. But I think any kind of purity spiral can really get out of hand. And I basically stayed out of it. And I think that was the right choice. I do think that they have a point. I don't think we should worship the women and think that, put them on pedestals as great thought leaders or thinkers or leaders of any kind, really. I don't think that's a very good idea. But I think certainly a lot of the anti-woman sentiment just got out of hand. I mean, it was just a purity spiral, and they come and go. They flame out by their very nature. And I don't think what the alt-right is self-destructive. That's obviously wrong.
Yeah, of course not. But that it was a very it threw a wrench into the work for quite a while. Tara McCarthy disappeared from the internet for a while. I was legitimately
no, she didn't actually. But anyway, I'm not going to.
She went private.
I don't want to get into the. the details of it. Yeah, she did for a few days. But I mean, it was a horrible experience for a lot of people, and yeah, it was shitty. But I think it's over now. I think there is a consensus arrived at, and you know, it's history.
I'm gonna interject here because we're sort of getting towards the end portion. I know I'm supposed to be moderator, but my thoughts on that is I think there's a good balance between not, you know, of course, not white knighting and like, you know, throwing your jacket out for women, you know, every second. That's really not necessary. You know, but I did find it hypocritical for people in the alt-right to be like going after women like crazy and at the same time being like, we need to make white children, we need beautiful white women, and then like just hating on any white woman who opened their mouth. So, and then any guy who defended a woman, they're like, oh, you're a fucking cuck, you little white knight, dude. Like,
I love the new term, alt-bugmen.
Alt-bugmen. that is a good one. Yeah, but no, I think in general, I think people did purity spiral too much, and yeah, you just can't, like, if every single person who had a little squabble or drama or something, if you let that get you down and not move forward, you would never get anywhere. So I think Richard's right on that. You just got to like sort of put, you know, lay low on some of those topics and just keep moving forward. So let's see, we got a couple more super chats I'm going to read. Someone said, while you're discussing women in the movement, bring on Andrew Ehrenheimer. He has some rather straightforward opinions on that topic. I'm not really familiar with him.
Oh, is that Weave? That's Weave. Yeah. He's Andrew Anglin's second in command. He helps run the Daily Stormer.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't think he likes me very much, so he probably wouldn't come on. Yeah, I think I'm too radical for Weave. I think he had to disavow me after, you know.
Well, yeah, you didn't want to kill like 98% of the human population.
Yeah,
so
that was offensive.
I'm pretty savage. Anyways, next one says, this movement is a platform for political revolution, not a singles club. All right. It's interesting.
Okay.
Next one says, the same way black
What did I sign up for? I thought this was
Yeah, I know. I thought
this is not a singles club. I mean,
I have heard you I have heard you referred to as a country club fascist, Richard.
I don't disagree.
But I'm a singles club fascist.
Okay. Real quick, they said the same way black identity flourishes because they are a minority and they use that to their advantage for their own interests as a minority, white identity isn't an all or nothing game. It may serve the same function. I think that's actually sort of a good point. What do you think, David? Richard?
I actually said as much during this conversation.
Okay. You have any thoughts, David?
Oh yeah. Can I ask how much longer is this going on for? Because it's getting quite late here.
Yeah. What? Oh yeah. I'm sorry. David's.
I was actually only expecting to be on here for an hour.
Not only is David teamed up on, but he's also in the UK hours, so I think it's like two almost 3 morning. Yeah. So okay. Let's go ahead, and I think if Spencer's interested, I know James Alsop wants to come on here, and I know Woes probably has a few words. Are you available?
I could give it another 30, and then I've got to run.
Okay. So let's. Why don't we do the closing statements between Richard and David? Why don't you? I think this has been a really productive debate. I've personally enjoyed it, and I think it has been a productive time instead of some shouting match or like I said again, I do appreciate you, David, that you weren't just screaming ad hominems and like playing silly word games. You actually did have a fair conversation with Richard, so I do appreciate that, and I appreciate you, Richard, coming on. I know you have a busy schedule and you have a lot of people that want your attention, and I do really appreciate you. I know you had to distance yourself from me for some things, but appreciate you coming on. So why don't we go ahead and Richard, you give your closing thoughts to David about the debate, and then David, you give your thoughts, and then you can leave, and then we'll do a little overdrive session.
Sure. From out of this chaos of mass immigration and multiculturalism and multiracialism, we will become who we are. We are going to rediscover our identity. So many of these things that our ancestors took for granted, we are going to renew. So hail victory.
Is that it?
Yep. Go ahead,
That's
David.
it.
I guess my position is I still am thoroughly unconvinced that ethno-nationalism is even achievable, let alone a good thing. And I still leave this debate thinking that what you're advocating is a bad idea with a long history of violence, mass violence, and genocide. So yeah, it's all a spook.
Is there anything that you do agree with Spencer on?
I agree that the current situation we're in is unsustainable.
That's a start.
That is a good start. And did you enjoy your time here? Did you feel like you were treated fairly? All right, cool. Yeah. So I would definitely love to have you back on, David. So thank you and have a good night. Say hello to the fellow UK dudes over there. And yeah, we'll see you soon, David.
Bye.
All right, take care.